Welcome to the YouTube channel Upcycled Industry. Today with Christian. Welcome, Christian. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here as well. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Now let's tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Okay, so my name is Christian Kempf-Griffin, and I work for a company based out of Scotland that's called Cellucomp. I'm the CEO of Cellucomp. And we've been running this company since 2005, so quite a long time. And I formally joined the company in 2011 as CEO, and formerly I was an investor in the company.
Great. Okay. So you have already been interested in Cellucomp for quite some time in that case.
That's right. Yeah. I like the idea originally because I should introduce as well, sort of indirectly, the two founders of the company. So Dr. David Hepworth and Dr. Eric Whale, who were friends of mine. And they just sort of thought a little bit differently out of the box. They're both material scientists. One comes from a biology background, the other from a chemical background. And they were both interested in sort of nature and how there were some really good properties that come out of nature and how to take those into reality. And they were both in academia and were very frustrated that all their ideas were never becoming anything. They were always staying in the research phase. So it's quite exciting for them to jump into this. And essentially what they wanted to do is look at very, very small fibers. So what you would maybe call nanofibers, although I'll clarify that in a second, but very, very small fibers that come from cellulose, which are extremely strong and have some wonderful properties. Now, most people are taking these cellulose fibers, okay? It's called nanocellulose, or it's called microfibrillated cellulose. Microfibrils, so it's quite an interchangeable world. There's also nanocrystalline cellulose, so it can be very confusing what all these things are, but basically it really comes down to extracting small fibers from cellulose. And most people are taking it from wood because the paper industry was under this enormous threat of, well, our industry is going down, no one's reading print anymore, everything's digital, so what do? We need some extra materials. And so it was quite a good way for them it was almost business reasons forced them into this R&D. Whereas Cellucomp came from a slightly different perspective. They said, okay, rather than being forced to use a material that we need to do something with, why don't we actually take the best material out there that can produce the end material that we're looking for. So really what they decided to do was to say, hey, look, we should take this from renewable sources, from waste streams. So in fact, what we do is we take the microfibrillated cellulose from waste streams of root vegetables. And when I say root vegetables, that could be anything from carrots to potatoes to sugar beet. And when I'm talking about waste streams, or co-product streams, I'm really talking about after the industry has dealt with the plant for its primary purpose, it then has a waste stream or a co-product stream that it uses maybe to put back on the land, maybe it's not used, or maybe it's a cheap animal feed or something, but it's not really valued that much. And so this is exactly what Cellucomp does, is it takes the waste stream of these root vegetables and uses them for high value products like MFC.
Sounds great. And is totally in line with the circular economy, of course.
Yeah, it is.
Now you said,
sorry, I'll just interrupt you for a sec, but it's important. Is a lot of people have this focus on, well, because of the whole ethanol problem, or the whole issue of planting just for energy, or planting just for materials, but then competing for land with food. And the advantage of taking things that are co-product streams of the food industry means that you're not competing for land from food. You're just using something that's left over, essentially, and making use of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. No, fully agree. And exactly the concept that also we as a company are highly interested in. So you said you call it co-product streams or waste streams. Is that also from a business perspective for you an interesting resource to work with? Because how is the market for these resources? Is it already quite developed? Is it resources that are available a lot? Are prices high or low? Or how is this resource traded and handled at the moment?
That's a really good question. So just going back to the origins of the company, the easiest way to test this material was to actually go to the grocery store and buy carrots. Okay. So, I mean, filling up your caddy with carrots and going into the lab and putting it into a pot and trying different things to make the material. But as you can understand, it's not very business friendly at scale to be going to Lidl every day and buying carrots. It's just not possible. So you really need to figure out what is the best way to scale up this business and what industries are in place where you can get a feedstock, a constant feedstock, and an easy access to it. So there are many different ways. There is actually a co-product stream from the carrot industry, okay, because a lot of people take keratin out. So that's either carrot juice or using the dye from the carrots, and therefore you have the fiber left over. But that's kind of spotted around the world. You also have people use potato. They take starch out of potato for quite a lot of functions, and then you would have that fiber left. So that's possible. But what we really landed on is our major feedstock is sugar beet pulp. And that's because the sugar industry is massive. So there's 7 million tons of sugar beet pulp that is produced annually in Europe just from making sugar. Okay. And because sometimes it goes to animal feed, so it's a low grade animal feed. The animals don't rely on this, so they're not all going to starve if it's taken from another area. But what it means is that it's already prepared, it's pelletized, it's put in warehouses, it's shipped around. The distribution is there already because it's already done. It's regulated because you can't put a whole bunch of feathers and stones into animal feed. So their care is already taken to sort of pre-organize the material. So you got lots of it. It's all over the world, and it's sort of a good, reliable source. We've also tested sugar beet pulp from Egypt, from Russia, from Germany, from France, from the US. And when you actually take it through our process, at the end, it doesn't matter where it comes from. You all end up with the same material. Okay. So it's quite good in that way for us because it's scalable, therefore a scalable business.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the exact right keyword, scalable. A lot of companies I know that are working with such co-products, they do face the challenge of finding this constant feedstock in the same quality. Some of them rely on a similar quality or similar properties. Sounds like you are not facing that challenge so much, but definitely also the consistency in the amounts available. So are you also looking for other materials, other feedstocks, or is this really the scale or the amount you need at the moment for your production? So maybe it would also be interesting to learn how much are you producing at the moment?
It's more than sufficient to do what we need to do. As I mentioned, 7 million tons that's a lot. That's a lot of material. Now we obviously don't need to take all of it by any means. So what we did is we started in our lab, and we started with a pot, as I mentioned, in the kitchen. We went to a 30 liter reactor, then a 150 liter reactor. Then we went outside to do a 1,000 liter reactor, and now we built it up to a 5,000 liter reactor. So we can produce about 400 tons a year, the material in this factory. And in fact, we're really now just negotiating a 2,000 ton factory for this material. So this really is in the scale up phase. And we have sort of, areas where we can talk about applications in a second, but there are different venues and customers that are interested in getting this
Yes.
sort of more globally and not just in Europe or
Yes.
just in France or just in the UK, for instance.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you talk about your material and everything. Can we maybe introduce your product a bit closer to the listeners? What are you producing? What's the product called? And who are your customers?
Okay, so let me just go back. So as I mentioned, it's microfibrillated cellulose. So if you had this in your hand, what does it look like? Well, it looks a little bit like grated cheese. Okay, so if you can imagine that. Okay, so it's sort of granules. So you can pour it out, but it's not like a fine powder. It's not like a very, very fine powder. It's sort of like a, sort of slightly humid powder. Okay.
Okay.
But when you mix those into water, into water-based formulations, you don't see them anymore. They're dispersed into water. If you went under a microscope, you would see something that's interesting, but to the naked eye, you don't see anything in particular. Okay, so it would just look like thick water. So this material, what it does is it does two main things. One is that it thickens things. Okay, so it adds viscosity. So if you can imagine, if you have a paint, if you had no viscosity in your paint, it would just run down your wall. If you had no viscosity in your shampoo, it would not be viable to use. You need a bit of thickness in there, okay? But you also need thickness when you're making cement. You also need thickness when you're for drilling fluids, okay? You need thickness in for washing detergents. As you can imagine, there's quite a lot of areas where thickening water-based formulations is interesting. The second thing that the material does is it strengthens things. It adds structure, okay? So what does that mean? So if we go back into a paint, that means, okay, you could make it anti-crack as a result. Okay, so it adds some toughness to it. Certainly in thicker paints, you can get that. In paper, it can add strength, quite a lot of tensile strength to paper. Okay. And even in food, if you use it as a food additive, okay, it's, I don't know if you know this, but let's say you take a muffin or a baked good, that sugar is not only the sweetener for this, but it's also a structuring agent. Okay, so it helps it rise, it helps it give it form. So our material can help do that as well. Okay, so thickening and strengthening are two things.
Yes.
Now, when you mix it carefully with other things, you can bring on new properties. Okay, such as barrier. Okay, so when you're talking about a coating, and you want barrier, that can be an important property. We can get to that in a second. Okay. So the material, by the way, is called Curran, and Curran is the Gaelic word for carrot, because that was the origin of the company. Okay.
I see. All right.
Yeah. So you have a material that is Curran, which can be put into a lot of water-based formulations. Okay, so it doesn't really work with solvent-based, and we don't want to work with solvent-based anyway. We prefer to work with water-based, but it can go into a lot of these types of applications. So our main goal now, and we've looked at many, many wide different kinds of applications, and to figure out, okay, where is the best place to use all of this current material? And actually, what we figured out is that where there's a massive draw right now is really in trying to convert packaging away from some nasty things. One nasty thing is fluorochemicals, or PFAS. Okay, these are these chemicals that never degrade into the atmosphere, and they're in everything from your Gore-Tex jacket to your pizza box to there've been films made of it and all this kind of stuff. So we want to make sure that people aren't inserting fluorochemicals into paper-based products, let's say. The second thing is that we want to do our bit to try and reduce plastic. You have many, many different governments that are restricting plastic. They're going to tax it very soon. It's getting more and more serious. And so brands are needing to find solutions. Now, you can find a solution for plastic by using paper, let's say, in some applications, but in others it's very hard. If you take dairy, for instance, it's very complicated to get a paper-based pot, let's say, put it into your fridge and hope that it won't get all soggy and not workable after a period of time.
Absolutely.
So what we did is we said, okay, we've got these granules. That's interesting, but we have to send it to people who have to test it, who have to give it to someone else, who has to give it to someone else, who has to give it to the consumer. And for us to convince people all the way down the value chain to get something and say, no, use our material. I can tell you, I know it's hard to see out there, but if you can imagine this working, then it's great. So that was actually quite hard to do. Because it was hard to convince people with just these granules to say, this is going to solve your problem. So we had to get to work ourselves. And what that means is that we had to work with partners, find people where we could get end products delivered, where those end products would be much more understandably and viewable and tangible for brands to understand. So we've developed now our own mixing Curran in with pulp for molded fiber products, for instance. Okay. That could be in the form of, let's say, a yogurt container. Then we've also developed things like, we've also developed a barrier coating. So we're now not producing the granules, but we're producing the granules in the coating. Okay. And then we can now present a coating and a cup. And if you spray the coating on the cup, suddenly you have a workable product in the end. And it's much easier to go to a brand with something that feels real, as opposed to just the base material.
Of course, yes.
So this is what we've done. And of course, now the drive in this industry is huge, right? So you can imagine cosmetic jars not being in plastic anymore, but being in fiber. You can imagine many products.
And how do we have to imagine the product? Is it like a see-through, or does it have a color? Or because I've never seen a coating made from Curran or made from the pulp from the sugar beet roots.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's helpful, or maybe it doesn't work on YouTube, but this is an example of a tray. Okay.
Okay, great.
A tray that would be made. So that tray itself you can see a bit of a shine to it. So there's a bit of a coating.
Correct. Yeah.
And I could take this and fill it with water, with hot coffee, with milk, whatever, and it's not going to get soggy. It won't stain on the other side, okay? Because it's got coating on it, and then the actual product itself is made with Curran. Not only Curran, okay? You have to remember that it's not 100% at that. And this is important, that the Curran acts as sort of an accelerator to end performance. So a small amount can give a disproportionate value to the end product. Okay. And this is important because for a couple of reasons. One is that if we had to produce massive amounts of this, it would be, first of all, a big drain in our scale up, right? Because that's a massive amount of material. But secondly, it would add to the cost of it. And if you want the end cost to be workable in the market, you need to make sure that you're not adding so much cost to the material that you can't actually get it out there. So 2% of our material in this end tray is actually quite a good business proposition, because you're getting the properties you want without the added cost. It makes us be able to sell our product at a reasonable price as well, because we're not adding to the end product price too much. So we are an additive in the paper, and we're also an additive in the coating. It's not the coating 100%.
All right, I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and and also shows why you chose to go down those industries that you just explained. That's super interesting.
But also just if you put it into shampoo or into coatings or whatever, it's still a small percentage. So
yes.
And in fact, when we put it into food, so if we put it into a muffin, we would use 0.6% of our material in the muffin. Okay. But you can get rid of synthetic emulsifier. You can reduce the thickener that's in there. You reduce sugar and fat by 30%.
Yeah.
Okay. You can take out egg. So 0.6% is meaning that you can actually change quite a lot of your formulation and still get a viable product at the end. It tastes good. And so that's a really important approach for us in the market, that we allow ourselves not to be 100% of the material, but part of the material.
Yeah, that's great. And you also said that you want to contribute to reducing plastics and all of these topics. Now, how is Curran, is it biodegradable or recyclable, or how does it behave once it's
so let's go back.
post-consumer?
Let's go back to this as an example. You can completely break it down and recycle it. Okay, so you can make a new hand sheet from it. You can make a new paper product from it. It's not a problem at all. It's also completely biodegradable. Remember, we're just taking vegetable and we're chopping it up. So Curran is completely biodegradable as well.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
And so you could basically break and bury this in your home compost. It would be fine to do. Okay. Or you could recycle it. We prefer recycling because I think, compost, if you were adding all your yogurt containers every day into your compost, it would put quite a lot of pressure on the compost to break it down. So we would always encourage reusing as opposed to just burying things. But I know that it really depends country by country where they like to focus on these things.
Correct. Absolutely. So do you also advise your customers on how to build the storytelling around the Curran they're using in their products? Or is that something you leave to your customers completely?
No, we will assist them in that. It's basically their job to do that. But I think really what they want to say is, this is compostable, this is recyclable, it ticks these boxes. Those are the most important things. Yeah.
And are you and or your customers talking about the raw material that is used? So is there also an upcycling or circular economy approach or story behind the whole thing?
I think it really depends on who we're talking about. And just to be clear, our customers now are some of the middle people. So for instance, if you're going to make this tray, our customer is the person who's making the tray. Okay. So, and then they're selling to the brand. Okay.
Yes.
Even though we have gone directly to the brand, gotten buy-in from the brand, and then the brand and we go to converters and say, okay, make this, for instance. Okay. So our sales are to the middle person. Okay.
Yes.
In terms of where we are in terms of launching, for instance, this molded fiber, it's different for coatings. We've been selling into coatings for a while. Okay. But for this molded fiber, it's actually quite new. So when we were in the show, Plastic Free World Show, in Germany, this is sort of a bit of a launch of that product. Okay. So right now, the brands that we're working with who have bought in, have tested, have tried their yogurt in the fridge for a month, have done all the testing. This is now being rolled out. Okay. So in fact, you won't even see this product out on the market. So part of the plans that we're making now are the marketing related plans. Yes. And it will really depend country by country about how that gets marketed, because it really is a country by country thing.
Yes, that's correct. There are different countries reacting differently and communicating differently on this. That's correct. Absolutely. Now, I would like to maybe come back to you again a bit, because you said you were investor of Cellucomp before, then joined as CEO in 2011.
Yeah.
That's quite some time already. First of all, yes, and
unexpected, I have to say.
Yes. So, what's your motivation? What's about Cellucomp that really fascinates you? And
yeah, well, it's interesting. So I'll give you a little bit of background on my career. So I started off in the fashion industry. So I was a director at Ralph Lauren, and I was a managing director at Lacoste. And I got quite into the sustainability world, I suppose, primarily when I became CEO of a company called Eden, who had a mission statement, which was to create sustainable trade in sub-Saharan Africa. So the owner of the company was Bono from U2, and it was his family that ran this business. So essentially what we started to do is really look deep into the sustainable aspects of the fashion industry. So what does sustainable mean? It really means, what is sustainable for people, i.e. people who are either making garments, but also sustainability in terms of material. So in the end, we launched something called the Conservation Cotton Initiative, which is 10,000 farmers in Uganda who are making organic cotton. Okay. But it also had a conservation component. In other words, if the elephant trail was to go through from South Sudan into Kenya, through Uganda, how do you make sure that conservation is right too? So really taking a holistic view of sustainability from the materials to make sure that the people are treated well, and to make sure that you're making good product and good profitable product as well. So that business was sold to LVMH. But I got quite involved in the sort of sustainability world. And when I met Dr. Hepworth and Dr. Whale, and they were playing around with some ideas, I said, this is fantastic. This is really taking something that is basically a waste stream and converting it into something that can add value. So really, again, looking at the whole side is, not only are we trying to take a material that is a good starting point, but also to make sure that what we're producing in the end has a good endpoint to it. Okay. So, and one thing that's also important about the production of Curran is that when we extract our fibers, we also produce a waste stream. Okay. But that waste stream we can convert into biogas. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think these things are terribly, terribly important. Is what I learned, and part of my career was that you really needed to take a very, very full look at what is happening from start to finish. And so as I was speaking to David and Eric, and we were sort of wondering about what we could do, etc., I thought, well, this is really an exciting prospect. It's an interesting startup. It's a complicated business. It's not something I knew well of. So the three of us work very well together because I can bring a different set of skills to the business. They try to keep me out of the lab and out of the factory. I thought that it really deserved the attention and the hard work to try and get it off the ground. Now, any startup is very hard to get off the ground.
Yes.
And especially when you're talking about materials, because people are very cautious about using new materials. You have to develop the material. You have to make sure that it's cost effective. You have to scale up. You have to get investment, and so on and so forth. So it's a long road, much longer than I expected it to be. But it's also incredibly interesting, and it's very easy to be passionate about what one is doing in this case. So that was kind of my motivation. I don't know if that makes sense. Sometimes you just fall into things too, and that's also an interesting motivation for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know it. I have had a similar change, like from a completely different background to what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But especially the fashion industry, it's interesting because it's not known to be like sustainable or anything. So
no, well, I mean, the fashion industry was very much the early part was sort of, there was this sort of preoccupation about making sure that there weren't 15-year-old workers in the factory, and there was no sort of, slave labor component. That was all the focus at the beginning. And then there became a wave of sustainability that is coming in. So, I mean, you can now see it on the market. It's much more prevalent than it was. So, H&M launched Conscious as a brand. Everyone is into it. Pangea now is out making garments. There's new innovation coming all the time. We were members of the Organic Exchange, which was, sorry, I've got some sun here. There's some Organic Exchange, which was the first organization is now called Textile Exchange, but focuses only on sustainability issues for the fashion industry. So it does have a reputation of being a dirty industry. You have imagery of dyes, making rivers blue and so on and so forth. But it is essentially cleaning up its act. And there are many more initiatives that are improving that. But that was really all starting in 2004 or 5, where it really started.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So it really also sparked your passion for sustainability kind of at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I decided after, I'm not going to go back to anything that is not down that track somehow, because there's so many interesting business models there and things to do in that arena.
That's actually really great to hear, and maybe also interesting for people who are thinking about doing such a shift, or would like to also get engaged with more sustainable enterprises and also projects. Can you really advise people to change and do, or do get engaged with sustainable business models? Is it worth it? Do you see it as, something that also in the long run?
I think, this is now just my view on the way the world will work in the future. But I think we just all need to our number one skill has to be adaptability, because things are changing so fast that if we're not adaptable and not open to change, then we will not be the people who are going to work. So first of all, people have to get out of their maybe fear of saying, hey, listen, I came up studying communication or something like that, so I can never be a scientist or something like that. I don't actually believe in that. I think that we constantly need to be renewing ourselves as much as possible. And so absolutely, you can get into sustainable things. There's just no reason why you can't do it. So part of it is getting over the fear. The other thing is if you could be if you're an investor, you could invest with funds that only invest in sustainable businesses, for instance. If you're more of an engineer, you can work on manufacturing for sustainable businesses. So there's so many ways now that you can get into it that I don't think you're restricted no matter what your skill set is. And it's actually quite nice to develop new skills as you go through your career, and not say you can't be determined on the basis of what you took at university. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Not if people are working to the age of 65, 70 and beyond. Well, at 50, there's no reason why you can't go into a different industry.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that's really exactly the right, approach and tip also for the listeners. Maybe talking about future and changing and getting engaged and so on. And what's the future of Cellucomp? Where are you going with the company? What are your ambitions?
Well, there's sort of shorter and longer term. The short term is to get the scale up factories, so the much bigger commercial factories set up, so we can respond to the demand for some of these new products and get them to. So that's already a lot of work and a lot of time. But we have many more ambitions with the product as well. So some of the work that we're doing now is, this may sound more futuristic, but using the material as a scaffold for virus-like particles, which means that you could do cell regrowth, you could use it for bandages in the pharma industry. We've even developed now a coating that is antiviral, antibacterial. So rolling that out into the industry, which is complicated, there's regulatory stuff to do, but really anywhere where we can try and solve, let's say, big impact problems. So we've taken on this sort of, let's say, the plastic thing first. There is the whole pharma health side, antiviral. You can imagine products now needing antiviral materials. We have, and then really the health issue, which is really trying to reduce sugar in fat in food. So I think those are sort of ambitions that we have. We would love we would love airplane wings to be made with this stuff down the road. There's no reason why not. But if basically the overall long-term ambition is that renewable materials will be the focus of everything we use. And to some extent, we can see many applications for this material that would go into many different industries long term.
Yeah, no, sounds great. And also that you have plans of entering many more markets. That is, of course, a lot of work. Maybe quickly, just summarizing again, I think I forgot to ask that in the beginning, but how big is Cellucomp actually? How big's the company? How many people?
We're 13 people, and I'm actually based in France. I'm based in Paris. So
I see.
I'm Canadian. I'm based in France, and the company is in Scotland. So it's just outside of Edinburgh, in a place called Fife. And so we have our manufacturing facility in Glenrothes, Fife, and we have our lab and our office in Burnt Island, Fife.
All right, good. Is that just where it started off, or was that a decision?
That's where it started off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
because one of our investors is the Scottish enterprise, so the Scottish government.
All right, I see. Cool, great. Now, I think from my side, we talked about a lot of topics that are super interesting. I think you gave us a lot of insights. What I would like to ask you as maybe last question from my side is there anything you want to share with the audience, with the listeners, any insights, inputs, motivation you want to give to them? Or do you have any questions that you want to ask?
No, I don't think I have any questions. It's very hard to, I have loads of questions that I could ask. I think it would be very interesting to engage with the audience, and I'm open to do that. I think we learn a lot from getting engagement. So one of the things I would like to just state is that if anyone is watching this or would like to engage, we're very open to new ideas and to new things that people might think of or want to develop. So the door is open basically for that. And I would just encourage everyone to try and get into these industries and to look at where you can find some place of work that you can try and make a difference while you're doing something that you're passionate about as well. So that's really, I guess that's all I would say to the audience above and beyond what I've told you about our product.
That's absolutely great. And I think really you showed us during the interview that you are really open to a lot of new applications and ideas. So I really hope that you will get some feedback from the listeners and people watching this interview. And I would like to thank you very, very much for having this discussion with me. It was very insightful, and I hope people will enjoy watching it.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Thanks a lot, Christian. Bye-bye.
Bye.